I'm going to take you through another Strathmore learning series. This is Learn to Draw Textures in Colored Pencil. It was put together by Cynthia Knox. There are 12 lessons in here, and we'll go through each of them. It also includes 12 sheets of Bristol vellum paper to complete your projects on. So when we first open up, you have the welcome, and again we have what the learning series from Strathmore is, how the pad works, and it gives you a little bio on the author that put this together. Then we start in with the appeal of colored pencils. It's just a little blurb about why people like colored pencils and why people like to work in them. Then we go through how to get started, what supplies you'll need, the different types of pencils, what they're made of, also the ones that are specifically used in this book for each of the projects. Then she goes through the basics of how to lay down color. You got the circular, horizontal, vertical, cross hatching, and then also how to apply color, such as the amount of pressure that you put on your pencil to achieve the looks you need to achieve. And each of the lessons also tells you how much pressure to apply for that particular step. This is just a little bit more of that. This here tells you a little bit about color theory and how the color wheel works. And then we start getting into lessons, and so there's not a lot of pre-reading. You can kind of just jump in. You do not need to know how to draw to go through this book. There are templates online that you can get. It tells you right here to go to strathmorelearning.com/coloredpencil-textures _textures to get your templates. There's also online videos that will walk you through the process of laying down color and completing the projects as well. One thing I really like about this is it does give you the colors used. So you have a palette and it tells you the actual color name. This project uses the Prismacolor pencils, so if you have Prismacolor pencils you can just use the names that are here. Otherwise, if you have other pencils, then you'll just have to try to match the color as close as possible. So the first lesson is sleek texture with dark shadows, and to practice that we do cherries. Then we have sleek texture with bright highlights, and to practice that we do some peppers. Then we have a metallic texture and do a vintage microphone. Next we have background textures, and we use bubbles to learn this because most of this is focused on the background because you see the background through the bubbles, and this is a great way to learn how to do transparency and bubbles. Great project for this book. And here we have colored eggs, which you learn how to do the fragile shells and woven wood texture. Wood texture is probably one of the hardest things to do, though the woven wood is probably one of the easier things because it relies more on shadows rather than, say, wood grain. Again, we have a nice large palette, and she does go through and tell you how to layer it and which ones to use and where. Then we have a Flora Still Life, which practices delicate flowers, glass, water, and wood surface textures. So here, instead of relying more on the shadows, we're relying, well, there are shadows, and to create the wood texture is shadows, but it's a completely different technique to actually achieve that wood grain. And here we have reflective porcelain textures with just a tower of teacups. Then a nature still life to practice stones and foliage textures. Pink rose. This will give you rose petal textures and just petal textures in general. This one's really cute. Toddler to practice fabric and skin textures. Notice the toddler's face is covered. This kind of alleviates the... In this way, you still get to practice the skin tones and fabric, but you don't have to worry about getting the proportions just right on the face. The face is actually more of an advanced technique. So this is really good practice to get you started on how to do skin tones. Then we have a Siamese fighting fish, the fin and scale texture. This is a really good textural practice, trying to get those shadows, creating the textures of the scales, and then the fins, getting them to flow really nice. And notice it doesn't take a lot of colors. I mean, you're talking 7 colors here to create this. And you can get a lot of depth with just 7 colors. And our final project is leather boots, and you learn how to do leather texture. You get a little bit of shine and the folds in the boots. And then this tells you how to remove the paper from the pad, so that way you can have a working piece and not worry about burnishing or damaging the paper underneath. And also you can take this out and then turn back to your project that you're going to work on and have the instructions right there, so you don't have to flip back and forth, which is really nice. I already transferred all of them onto the papers. Very simple to do. So without further ado, let's get started. As I worked through the projects in this series, I noted that they began very basic and increased in complexity as you work through the book, building on skills that you learned in previous lessons. You learn how to create different textures in each project, which gives you a good base to tackle just about any project you may come across once you finish these projects, with the exception of portraits and hair. You get a brief introduction to skin on the toddler project, but I don't think it's enough for a beginner to be completely comfortable tackling skin. The projects range from about 2 hours upwards to just under 8 hours to complete, depending upon the project and how much detail you want to put in. All of the blending is done with the burnishing technique, using some sort of colored pencil, usually white. Odorless mineral spirits are not used on any of these projects or mentioned in the book at all. So be prepared to take breaks in between projects to give your hand a break from the burnishing, should you be in the habit of pushing really hard when you burnish. She does give you a guide as to the amount of pressure you should be using on your pencil throughout the steps. However, light, moderate, or hard pressure can mean different things to different people. So take that into account. And if you're new to colored pencil, practice the different pressures on a scrap piece of paper to get the feel for how much pressure you think she means. As I approached this series with a good knowledge of colored pencil technique, I tried to go through it as if I knew nothing about colored pencil. Even with the knowledge that I had, I did find some of the instructions a bit confusing and wanted a little more clarity in some of the steps. I found this to be the case through the entire series. Just when I thought I'd figure out the instructions, I found she changed it up and I had to rethink that whole idea. I tried my hardest to stay true to the instruction that was given, but just couldn't get past the confusion and began to draw on my own knowledge to get through just some of the parts. This was a huge disappointment because I had high hopes in being able to direct complete beginners to this book to help them build their basic knowledge. Another thing I found disappointing was that she never mentions to put paper down to keep your hand off the areas you've already worked. This is something I always stress when working with any type of pencil. She doesn't mention this until you start on the black background in one of the projects, and that is only because of the type of pencil used to achieve those backgrounds. I felt that some of the projects could have used a few more colors or were the incorrect color combination to begin with when compared to the reference photo. Since I'm more of a realism artist, it was a bit of a stretch for me not to grab a couple other pencils and fix it. But again, I'm doing this as if I knew nothing, so that wasn't really an option. Also, being a realism artist, I did use the line art provided, and there were definitely a couple of projects I would have preferred to have made my own line art from the reference photos. There were lines that should not have been there, and there were lines that were left off that should have been there. So unless you're in a hurry, I recommend making your own line art from the reference and using that instead of the ones provided, at least with the more complex subjects. Another thing I would like to note is the amount of certain colors that you blow through because they are used in every project. Make sure you purchase extra of the white, Tuscan red, and spring green pencils if you're planning on doing all the projects in this book. The Stabilo black pencils that are used for the black backgrounds, make sure you get at least a half dozen of those. They go fast, and typically you use 2 per piece of art. Overall, I think there are some really great things about this series, and it is a great way to learn how to control your pencils and layer your colors. While I did struggle with some of the directions, there are videos to watch to help guide you through. I think this would be great for someone learning how to layer and blend colors and is just a bit uncertain about color pencils overall. However, if this was my only introduction to color pencil, I think I would have ran the other way and never touched another color pencil again. That being said, there are some things you can take away by going through this book. Just know you may need to be a bit more patient in deciphering certain portions of the instructions and their meaning. These are my own experiences and opinions with this series, and you could very well have a completely different experience. I hope you found this critique helpful. Until next time, keep on arting. Bye!